Hello and welcome to Inspired to Taste. I'm Liz Joy and today I'll be making a Queen of Hearts themed chocolate and cherry tart. Let's get started. Rather than recreate Disney or Tim Burton's Queen of Hearts, I decided I wanted to showcase a younger, stylish version of the character. I turned to Midjourney AI to help me brainstorm ideas to jumpstart a sketching session, but I ended up falling in love with one of the images it generated and decided to build templates directly from the AI design. But first, a few adjustments to ensure the size and shape match my tart shell. I also simplified the design a bit, gave her a crown, and added some playing cards to the frame. I might also add a few red roses. To make templates that are sturdy and wipeable, I always laminate my prints before cutting them out. I'm using my favorite chocolate pâte sablée recipe from spatuladesserts.com for the tart shell and decorations. I've linked to the recipe in the description and highly recommend giving it a try. It's always so therapeutic when you're encouraged to mix dough by hand. I'm rolling the pâte sablée to 4 millimeters or about 1/6 inch for the main queen shape as well as the tart shell. I want her face to be a separate layer and am planning to pipe her eye within a recessed area, so I'm just cutting down my original template. I want this layer to be subtle, so I'm rolling the dough thinner. I also cut out my crown and cards from this thinly rolled dough. Next comes the tart shell. I always chill my dough between each part of the process so it's easier to work with. Make sure to press the edges nice and firmly, then chill it for at least an hour before baking. I'll be blind baking the tart shell first, then the queen on her own, then the smaller cookies as a group. Time to make some royal icing. I want to keep this color palette limited to mostly primary colors. I'll be using hybrid consistency icing in gold, red, and white, as well as piping consistency icing in black and blue. To add depth to the crown, I'm starting with a base of white, which creates a canvas for a more vibrant red layer and helps the red really pop. Then, I'm outlining the heart sections and outlining and flooding the rest of the crown. Once that dries, I'm filling in the heart sections with red, then painting the body of the crown with metallic gold from Bakel mixed with color solution from the sugar art. The playing cards are pretty straightforward. I'm just going to flood them with white royal icing and allow that to dry overnight. Then I'm using a variety of edible markers to draw all the details. I'll be painting the queen's skin and the base layers of her hair directly onto the baked cookie surface using a variety of food coloring formats, then building up the design from there. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing. I'd also love to hear what themes you'd like to see me bake up next. I'm using royal icing to securely attach her face to the base cookie. After that, I'm piping her eye and we'll let that dry overnight while I move on to other decorations. I want to use chocolate ganache to add a tasty 3D design to her hair. I'm piping the ganache within a section, then smoothing it with a small palette knife, then moving on to the next section. I'm only going to do these 3 sections so that there's still contrast in the different depths. Since I want her sleeve to have a puffed effect, I'm adding ganache there as well. Then I'll get this into the fridge to set more firmly while I begin mixing fondant colors, since these sections will all be covered in a thin layer of fondant. For her hair, I'm going to dye marshmallow fondant 2 to 3 hues of blue to match the painted colors. Then I cut the appropriate sections from my original template, and I'm rolling the fondant fairly thin before cutting out each hair section. I painted a tiny amount of water onto the bordering cookie surface just to make sure it's all securely attached. Next, I'm using fondant sculpting tools to add texture to the hair section. And then I'll just follow the same process for the remaining 2 sections. To add to the puffy quality of her sleeve, I'm carving in some gathers. I'll be using red fondant for the sleeve as well as for some rose accents, and decided it should be cherry flavored to coordinate with my tart fillings. So I'm adding a generous helping of powdered freeze-dried cherries. Then I'm covering and shaping her sleeve. One of my favorite tricks for adding a kind of trippy, exaggerated effect to 3D accents is to emphasize existing shadows and highlights with a quick wash of food coloring. So here, I'm deepening the shadows with a darker blue. I meant to finish her dress next, but got distracted by this bare face. Let's paint this canvas. I love adding food coloring makeup to cookie faces, and will also be adding a couple of royal icing details for some subtle contrast. Back to our queen's dress. This back section is going to have a black lace accent. I love using a combination of painted details and royal icing when creating lace effects to give the impression of delicate depth. While I've got this black royal icing out, I figured I'd pipe a few black strands in her hair. After that, I'm adding a few swipes of watered down white to the highest points of her sleeve to exaggerate the puffed effect. Now for this fabulous spiky collar detail. I decided to make it out of chocolate marshmallow fondant because it'll allow a little more control over the shape than if I went with icing. I'm using a tiny petal cutter to cut half oval shapes. Then pinching the bottom edges together for a gathered effect. After that, I'm just using royal icing to attach them to her collar, making sure to angle them out a bit. And for a finishing touch, dots of white royal icing for additional visual detail and a spiky effect. I loved these little heart tattoos on the AI image, so I'm drawing them on with an edible marker. I'm adding a couple of additional fondant curls to frame the queen's face. I also really love this errant curl on the reference image. Since the edible version will be sitting atop a gooey filling, I'm making it out of pastillage, which won't melt or disintegrate like fondant or royal icing would. Next, let's crown our queen, using a bit of royal icing as glue. And just a few more heart details. It's finally time to construct this tart. I'm using my leftover chocolate ganache to pipe the bottom layer into my pre-baked shell. I wanted to bring some of the Queen of Hearts' personality traits into the flavor, so I'm topping the rich dark chocolate with a sprinkling of slightly bitter toasted cocoa nibs, followed by a dusting of aged sea salt crystals to represent her saltiness. For the top layer, I decided on a delicious cherry filling that's both rich and tart in flavor. I also added a bit of black pepper to the filling to represent her dark heart and spiciness. I've included the recipe in the description. To add a bit of final pizzazz as a finishing touch, I'm dusting on some sparkly red bakery bling sprinkles. I'm using tempered dark chocolate as the glue to securely attach my decorations. First is Her Royal Highness, then the border of cards along with several fondant roses I made off camera, and for the final detail, this flyaway curl. Let's take one final look at this regal dessert, and then it's off with her head.